All right. As you may have heard my presentation earlier, I'm Cynthia from EPFL Innovation Park, and I'm here also on behalf of Innosuisse and our Innosuisse activities. So we are definitely committed to supporting impact entrepreneurs and impact in innovators. This is our masterclass for those of you who are interested in learning more about how to scale business without sacrificing impact. This is a talk that I'm super excited about, that we developed together with Scott Poynton here, who you'll learn more about his journey because he will share it with us. But the goal really for us was to, how do we, at every entrepreneurial journey, there's an inflection point where you go from, okay, I've had this idea and then I want to scale it. But I think, but we also discuss about in the impact innovator journey, there's this inflection point where I have an idea, I have to scale it. It has to be sustainable financially or viable, a project or business. And how do you continue to grow without sacrificing impact? How do you kind of approach that influx point? So we thought this would be an interesting topic for you. So welcome to you all. I will be, for those of you interested in our Innosuisse training, I will be posting some links on the chat so you can visit us. We also have a booth. You can stop by and talk to our staff in the virtual platform if you haven't yet stopped to check the startups. And we also want to hear your feedback. So I will post a link for a survey so you can tell us how you like this talk. So without further ado, I will yield the floor to our speaker, Scott Poynton. So thank you, Scott, for being here.
Yeah, no, look, thank you, Cynthia, and hello to everybody, and my pleasure and privilege to be able to speak to the group. So I was asked to talk about this topic, scaling a business without sacrificing impact. And I've put here, you can see some lessons from 20 plus years as social entrepreneur, and probably need to talk many, many more hours to capture all the lessons. So I've captured, I think, towards the end of the presentation, some of the key lessons that I learned along my journey as a social entrepreneur, which is ongoing, and I'm still learning new lessons. And what's really interesting as I start new ventures, that I'm seeing some of these previous lessons reiterated. So it's good in many ways, because I'm seeing that these lessons carry forward. So I just want to share from my personal experience. I can't speak about anyone else, so I'm just going to share really my personal experience and my journey. And it's not particularly a tech-oriented journey, but nonetheless, because I'm a bit older than everybody, and we didn't have so much tech innovation back when I was starting out on my career. But nonetheless, I think there's some important lessons here that we can share that will be highly relevant to you all as you're going forward on your journeys. So, why isn't that working? Let me just click this button down here. Here we go. Okay. So before we get started, I just wanted, this word sustainability keeps creeping. Well, no, it's very strong, obviously, in all of the language we hear today. People are starting now to talk about ESG, environmental social governance. Previously, it was CSR, corporate social responsibility. And I tend to use a different term called earth-serving actions. And the reason is that sustainability has become such a meaningless term. It's been taken hold of by our marketing people and stretched beyond its original idea that we could keep doing things without harming the future generations and harming the planet. So I try not to use the S word. It may creep in from time to time, forgive me, but I tend to talk about earth-serving actions as those actions that we take that can help humans, but also help the more than human world. And I use that term deliberately because it means all other species, but it also means landscapes. It can mean mountains and rocks, some of the things that perhaps aren't living, landscapes that enrich our lives, enrich the lives of other species as well. So really helping the earth. And I think that when we think about it these days, there's a lot of things that fall under that idea of an earth-serving action. We need to protect human rights. We need to look at forest conservation. Ocean plastics are obviously a big issue, pollution in general, biodiversity, species loss, and of course climate change, and the big one there that's really looming large. And there's many other issues. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, and I'm assuming that you have, which is why you're at EPFL and you're involved in this day of Tech for Impact, is to start a business and to scale it without compromising your impact along the way. And we can do that. We can compromise our impact along the way as we, someone comes in with a large amount of money and we think, oh, this is terrific. This will help me take my business to scale, but we may lose impact along the way as we get taken off path. So it's not easy, but my presentation here is really aimed at sharing some of my experience, attempting to do just that. So a quick snapshot of my journey. I'm not going to go into great detail about myself, but I'm an Australian. I grew up in rural Australia, and up until my 15th birthday, I wanted to be a vet. I was very blessed to listen to a very old and ancient British forester on the radio in Australia, speaking about his work. His name is Richard St. Barb Baker, otherwise known as the Man of the Trees. And he spoke on the radio. And I don't know what I was doing inside as a young 15-year-old listening to the radio. It was a Sunday afternoon. But after listening to him for about 2 minutes, I decided that I would pursue a career, a life, following in his footsteps, trying to protect the world's forests. And along the way, I'd like to hope that I could help some animals as well. But this old man really inspired me. And I was very lucky at that young age, I think, to have that awakening, because I think a lot of young people don't really know what journey they should take. But I was very lucky to have that made very clear for me. That was in 1979. 20 years later, in 1999, I started a not-for-profit called the Tropical Forest Trust. We later changed the name to the Forest Trust. It's now called Earthworm Foundation, changed as its work has grown and scaled. I left that organization, having set it up, founded it and run it, founded it in 1999 and run it and as a CEO until the end of 2015. I then transitioned in a new leadership team, and I stepped out of the organization in August 2019 to start a new consulting company, which I call A Different Way, and you can see the logo up there on the top left, and a new foundation here in Switzerland called the Pond Foundation, with the idea of creating a ripple effect and focusing on my carbon zero. I'm not going to talk about that too much just now, but this is my journey. And of course, in this presentation, I'm going to focus here on that work that I've done really since 1999 as a social entrepreneur. But this stuff is super important too. And I'm not going to go into more detail about that, but where we come from in our early life experiences so very strongly affect the work we do and our ability, I believe, to scale our businesses and keep true to who we are and the impact that we're trying to create. So I'm not going to go into more detail about my childhood, but I'll touch on it as we go forward. So for me, it's always been about impact, and I write it in capital letters deliberately because I really wanted to have a big impact. Richard St. Barb Baker inspired me to imagine as a young lad growing up in rural Australia that I could go out and help save the world's forest. And as I embarked on that journey, I found that there wasn't a lot of money in that. My first job overseas was in the Mekong Delta, where experienced people were being paid vastly and more money than I was. But I was getting this incredibly rich experience, which really has stood me in great stead. And my philosophy was the money will look after itself. And so far, touch wood, it has. I would say if your primary focus is to make zillions of dollars, you're probably in the wrong place. Because look, if you want to make millions of dollars and zillions of dollars, you can be a social entrepreneur and make a lot of money. But the dichotomy tends to get in the way. So if your primary focus, your sole focus is to make lots of money, being a social entrepreneur is probably not the way to go. But having unbounded dreams is absolutely critical to this journey. Don't set yourself any boundaries would be one of the things that was very apparent to me. I grew up in rural Australia and no one imagined that I could have anything to do with tropical forest conservation, but I dreamed I could, and the old man had inspired me to do that. So absolutely dream your dreams and go for them. But you've got to have a passion, and we'll come to that a bit later in some of the other slides, because you will be challenged. You will be challenged on this journey, and you've got to have just a crazy passion for what you're doing to keep going. And I always just say, look, just go big, as big as you can. Hashtag let yourself go. Just go for it. So a little bit, again, I'm not going to go into great detail here because I want to get through so that we've got some questions. The TFT, so that the Tropical Forest Trust, started in 1999, became the Forest Trust, I think it was around 2010. So at our inception, there was a garden furniture campaign in Europe that started in March 1998 that highlighted the vast amounts of furniture coming into Europe from Vietnam was made from logs that had been ripped out of the forests in Cambodia, trucked over the border and mass produced into the furniture in Vietnam with huge environmental destruction and human rights abuses. So that got us going, and we managed to transform the garden furniture sector, which was pretty exciting. And along that journey, there was a forest that we got. It's called PITC. We got a forest certified as being sustainably managed in May 2002. And I put that because you can have a great idea, but you've actually got to do something. You've got to achieve something. You've got to prove that your idea counts. And we started in March of 1999, the TFT, in response to this campaign that started a year earlier. We were transforming the garden furniture sector, but when we were able to show that we could get forests properly and sustainably managed, it put the world on notice, saying, hey, what this organisation is doing, this is interesting. And then we built on that experience. So this is a bit of a journey. We had inception, we got our first achievement, and then we built on it. We went to the Congo Basin, where the largest forest industrial company in the Republic of Congo Brazzaville, called Congolese Industriel des Bois, worked with them for 5 years, got all of their forests certified, the first forest ever certified in the Congo Basin. And that led to others following that path. So by that stage, people were saying, hey, this TFT organisation, they're doing interesting things. But then we pivoted. The Stern Review came out at the end of 2006 and highlighted that deforestation for agricultural production was driving vast amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and really contributing to climate change, second only to the energy sector. So the energy sector was about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, and deforestation was around 18%. Transport, all of the trains, planes, cars, etc. in the world was a third in 14%. So I looked at that and I said, well, here we are working in the wood sector. We feel good about it, but we're not in the main game. The main game is to pivot and tackle agricultural expansion at the expense of forests. And that led to an explosion, really, of our work on the palm oil sector from 2010 to 2013 in particular. The work continues, but this was the pivotal time when we managed to convince Nestle and others to adopt no deforestation policies. Just got a little bit more about that later on. And then we went to another level. It wasn't enough to transform the palm oil sector. We managed to get Asia Pulp and Paper, which was Indonesia's, well, in fact, the world's largest vertically integrated pulp and paper company, to adopt no deforestation and pull the bulldozers out of 2 million hectares of forest. So on we went. So we just grew and grew and grew. I'm going to quickly show a garden furniture supply chain here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I am conscious of the time, but just to give you a bit of a view on the complexity that we faced. So this was for garden furniture, where we had the forests around Southeast Asia who were sending logs to the factories in Vietnam. And of course, they would pay money for it. They would convert the factory would convert the logs into furniture and send it to retailers in Europe who would pay money. The retailers would sell that furniture to consumers who would pay money. So this is a typical global supply chain where you had forests in a diversity of countries. You had factories in Vietnam, you had retailers across Europe and consumers across Europe. And there we go. In between all that, down here, you'll see these lines. We had traders and middlemen, and their job was to bring the logs from the forest to the factory, but it was also to obscure the origin of where the logs came from. So the factories didn't know where the logs were coming from because the middlemen and traders were concerned that the factory would go behind their back and buy direct from the forest and cut them out of the business. So there was a lot of corruption, a lot of mafia involved. It was pretty bad stuff. And likewise, between the European retailers and the factories, there are often traders too, who obscured the location. So the retailers selling the furniture, they knew it was from Vietnam, but that was about it. They didn't know the factory, and they certainly didn't know where the wood came from. And the NGOs looked at this wood flooding in through 1995, 96, 97, and they did some investigation, and they found that, yes, indeed, the illegal wood was coming in from Cambodia across, and other countries too, Laos, Indonesia, Malaysia, but certainly flooding in from Cambodia across the border into Vietnam. And they, of course, told the press about it, who then wrote articles and TV reports targeting the retailers, attacking the retailers and letting the consumers know what was going on, trying to get them to not buy this product. And of course, the NGOs did their own attacks, went and hung off some buildings, made protests. And so everything went crazy in the summer of 1998 here across the whole of Europe as the NGOs attacked the retailers. The governments in Europe were going, what's all this about? What's going on? We don't want this illegal wood. We don't want to be our companies and our consumers being linked to all of these bad practices. But the government in Vietnam, where the factories were saying, well, hold on a minute, hold on. We've got hundreds of factories here making this furniture, employing tens of thousands of people. This is an important industry for us. So straight away, we were seeing there were different perspectives. And of course, in the governments in places like Indonesia and Laos, where a lot of the wood was coming from, they saw this as part of the forest industry. But of course, they were also getting kickbacks from corruption and illegal logging that was happening there. And of course, then there was the government in Cambodia, which was being propped up basically by the military, the army logging all of this wood with all of these destruction going on. That was keeping the government. So they were quite happy to have it going on. Banks were amongst the scene. They were financing the whole thing. We had donors giving money to the NGOs. Above all of that, we had the UN, who was pretty ineffective, I've got to say, but they did have things like the UN Convention on Biodiversity, but no one was really paying any attention. So it was all a bit of a mess, right? You look at that and you think, golly, that's quite a mess. And into that, you could add, there's lots of people I haven't put on here, the regional and local governments in the countries, the flow of illegal wood. Into that walked the TFT. We set the TFT up and we said, right, well, we need to sort this out. So we started talking to the retailers. The retailers said, we'll pay you to sort this out for us. We were a not-for-profit. We weren't a consultant company. We started giving them some advice and guidance on their comms and policies. They had no idea where their wood was coming from. So where did they want the wood to come from? So this was some of the work that we did. We went out into the factories and started to give them technical assistance to put in place traceability systems so that we could work out where the logs were coming from, which meant putting a brake on all of this wood coming in from Cambodia. But of course, that created supply problems, because if you're not going to get it from there, where are you going to get it from? And so we started going out into forests in other parts of Asia and in other parts of the world to support them on their journey to better management and to become certified as sustainably managed. We then spoke to the NGOs and the press to try and help them understand the work that we were doing. And as you can see here, it really was a mess, a complex mess. And we haven't got everyone involved here. I haven't put trade unions here, workers, representatives. There's no Indigenous people. There's no communities here. There's a whole raft of people that I just couldn't fit here on this thing. And just to say, the donors started supporting us. We started working, factories and forests started to become members. And so TFT started to grow really, really quickly. I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but looking at the palm oil supply chain is something very similar. So the problem with palm oil is the forests were being cleared, destroyed to make a palm oil plantation. And then we had really big ones, we had medium-sized ones, and we had small farmers, which comprise about 43% of all of the palm oil that's sold into the world. And no one really knows where they are. And everyone's involved in chopping down the forest, or they were. And then we had the various supply chain all the way up to consumers. 50% of the products on a supermarket shelf contain palm oil. So we had this supply chain. We had traders again, NGOs, we had the press in various countries, we had the mills and the plantations in one country, the refineries in other countries, the brands in another country like Nestle, Ferrero. You've heard all the campaigns, I'm sure, against palm oil, likewise against the retailers. And then you had different governments with different priorities. You had donors, banks, you had the UN, trade associations, Indigenous people, labour unions, migration agents, lobby groups, trade associations, and into all that walked the TFT to try and sort it out. So again, an absolute mess. But we made progress, and that's what I want to talk about in terms of our impact. So what were the common elements of all of these situations? The common elements were NGO attacks, which meant there was a lot of stress and tension, a lot of stress and a lot of tension. And real red hot anger, like red hot, nasty, unpleasant anger on both sides. And there was a failed dialogue. The companies weren't talking to the NGOs. They had tried, And the NGOs had tried to talk to the companies, but they weren't getting anywhere. No one was speaking to each other in any civil way whatsoever. And the limited tools they had, like certification, sustainable certification, they weren't working. It just wasn't available at scale. And everyone was bunkered down. We had the NGOs in one corner firing rockets at the NGOs, sorry, at the companies, and the companies firing rockets back at the NGOs, and never the twain shall meet. There's absolutely no progress. Everyone and everything was stuck, and there was deep frustration on all sides. So my role in that, and the TFT's role in that, was to walk into these situations, and first and foremost was to listen. And I put here to both parties, but it really was to all parties. The idea was to listen to what people had to say, so that we could see if we could find some common ground. And the key thing was being the calm person in the room. This was my job, to be the calm person in the room, so that we could find common ground. When everyone's yelling at each other, it's really difficult to find common ground. And there was common ground. Nestle, for example, I've never met a company who wakes up and says, how many orangutans can I kill today? How many people can I put into slave labor today? It's not a KPI, but it happens as a consequence of their business. So when we got talking about that, we could start to imagine a different way of doing business, but we had to talk to each other. And then we had to get it down on paper. And this gave confidence that the companies were serious. And then we opened a dialogue between the NGOs and the businesses. And my job really was to set the mood so that they didn't yell at each other. And it really was about building relationships. And those relationships led to the transformations that I'll talk about in a moment. I'm not going to go again into detail, but these are some of the projects. I've mentioned a few of them already. The big 7 projects, I call it, major industry-wide transformations that we needed to bring change so that we could have impact. It just wasn't okay for the garden furniture sector to be linked to such terrible environmental and human rights abuses. We had to change the industry to make that impact. Likewise, in the Congo Basin, there was no forests being properly managed. We had to start with one that others could follow, and likewise with Nestle on palm oil. So I won't go into the others, but these are the biggest palm oil and pulp and paper companies and forest industry companies in the world. So I did all those projects, and you can see on the dates there, by December 2013, the world's largest palm oil company had made what we call a no deforestation, no exploitation commitment. And I thought, well, okay, that's great. And I looked back and I thought, okay, how do we take this change and thus this impact to scale? And we can't take it to scale if we're just working one company at a time, and we depend on NGOs to create the tension that we need to bring change. So I thought about this. How do we do it? And I looked back. If we look back and remember those supply chains, and I said to myself, well, who's got control? Like if we go back to these, I'll just quickly go back here. If we go back to these supply chain, who's got control there? So if we understand who's got control, let's go and talk to those people. But of course, the reality is that no one's got control. No one's got control in these complex supply chains, right? Everyone's just trying to do their own thing. So I asked myself, okay, so golly, no one's got control. So then I said, what can I control? And this opened a period of reflection for me. And what I realized is that I can only control myself. When I go into that room to sit with those supply chain members, be they a refiner of palm oil, a plantation, a small farmer, they've all got things that they're trying to achieve in their life. And the NGOs likewise, the banks likewise, the UN, the government, they've all got goals. I can't control any of them, and they can't control the others. We need to be able to talk to each other. We need to be able to find a way forward. So the essence of my experience when I looked at all this is that change happens deep in the recesses of the human heart, right? Things like all of these companies, the big 7 who made decisions to stop being linked to deforestation, to stop being linked to human rights abuses, they weren't worried about share price. They weren't worried about profit and loss. They were worried about them, but that wasn't the root of their change and the impact we created. Right? Those are more matters of the intellect. The decisions to avoid deforestation, to move away from practices that were causing human rights abuses, came when we were able to help the company leaders connect to what is uniquely theirs And that is their fundamental values, their beliefs, and I would say their soul, and act from that place. And I looked at this and I said, well, okay, if these sort of large scale, urgently needed change only happens when people get connected to their values. And if they only get to that place under tension created by NGO campaigns, we're not going to make it. It's too slow. And if we want to take change to scale, we need to find scalable ways to get people connected to their values and to act from that place and stay there, not just for 5 minutes and make a policy and then ignore the policy. We need them to make a policy and implement it and stay true to those values. So I asked myself, how do we do that? And I honestly did a lot of thought, a lot of walks and in the mountains, the Jura, thinking and thinking and thinking. And then I realized that I really concluded that the path to scale was literally staring me in the face. And I think it's staring you all in the face as well. And I mean that very literally. Because what I learned, and sorry for the long little text here, but it's such an important point that I wrote it out, is that amongst all of the crises and tension created by the NGOs, I had been able to sit with those leaders and get them to make major unprecedented decisions, huge company, and what led to ultimately industry-wide transformations by helping them connect to themselves and to their own values. And I'd done that, and this is the essence of my experience, I'd done that simply by being connected to myself. And what I learned was that by being connected to myself, it was easier for them to connect to themselves, okay? Now, you've seen this little picture in the bottom of my slides of this person praying to a duck. And Michael Leunig is an Australian philosopher and cartoonist. And back in 1990, he published a book of prayers, and he talked about a person praying to a duck as a symbol of them trying to get connected to who they are and their values. And yes, he said their soul. And this was very profound for me. And I've used this image a lot because I think it's really important for the lessons that I want to share with you about how you can take your impact to scale. I'm going to skip through some of these things, and I'm just watching the time. When I managed to I talked about, taking it to another level and getting, the big pulp and paper company to get the machines out of 2 million hectares of forest and the world's largest palm oil company. There was a profile done by a journalist, and he said Scott Poynton uses unusual methods. And he was really referring to my sharing of poetry and listening to try and get leaders to get connected to themselves. This idea of duck whispering, this idea of helping people get connected to, yes, it's easier to talk about a duck than a soul. And I talk about this secret, sacred art of duck whispering, calling forth their inner beliefs, helping them get connected to themselves, helping them to feel first and then think. Feel, I don't want to be linked to slave labor. That's a feeling. And then think, well, how am I going to rejig my business and my supply chain so that I can avoid that, or avoid deforestation, or avoid polluting, or avoid something, right? Avoid causing climate change. Feel it first, like I don't want to be linked to that. Then think how to do it, and then act, right? So I talk about R for resonance, D for dissonance, and then A for action. Feel the resonance, avoid the dissonance, and then act. We must act. And the essence of this is to call forth the good in others and believe that it's there. Because when I first started talking to NGOs, they were convinced that these people who worked for companies were absolutely evil, and there was no way anyone could even talk to them. And vice versa, the companies thought these NGOs were, just the devil incarnate. But we managed to break down those barriers and get people to talk to each other. And the whole idea, I won't read this out in great length, but the whole idea of this person praying to the duck is that if we can live our life according to that, it can influence the people around us to do the same. So our lifelong journey of trying to get connected and stay connected to who we are means that others have that capacity to do the same. And this was Michael Leunig's text. We haven't got time to go into it in great detail. This concept of getting connected to the duck. So it's, again, look, if I can be connected, then I can call forth the connection for others. But they're shy animals, ducks, right? So they don't like the craziness that goes on in our mind when we're tense and we're angry. So it's really hard when we're tense and angry to find a way forward. But when you find that connection, you help people get calm. And that's when the mind can quietly work and get connected to its inner wisdom. And then we make wiser decisions. And this is what I've seen from my work over and over and over again. So the art of change, the art of creating an impact, for me, is the art of duck whispering. It's the art of calling forth what's good and essential in others. And the magic is to do that. We don't need a special training. We just need to get connected to ourselves. And people say to me, this is just spiritual nonsense, surely. And then I'm not going to go through all of these things, but these are the achievements that I managed to craft under the big 7 projects. And that doesn't mention the hundreds of other projects that I've worked on. We transformed the garden furniture sector. We got 4,000 machine guns taken away that were being used to protect the forest in Indonesia and kill people on a regular basis. We got the first forest certified in the Congo Basin, and there's now 6 million hectares certified as sustainably managed. Nestle, and then the palm oil companies, the pulp and paper companies. This is real stuff. This achieved something. And when Wilmar went no deforestation, we now have over 800 companies committed to acting in this way. And here's some numbers for you, away from the sort of more spiritual side of things. TFT's initial capital came from our members. I told you in the thing, the members, I showed you that supply chain where the members gave us to start our operations, $800,000 to get going. From 1999, when we started, to 2002, we really drew down on that capital, and we weren't looking really great. And then from 2002, we did take off, and we saw around average income growth of about 30% per year, even with the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. In financial year 2015, when I stepped aside as TFT CEO, our annual turnover was $18 million. We had about 265 people working in 48 countries, transforming the supply chains of more than 20 commodities. You might sit there and say, well, I'm looking for a tech company. I want to make billions of dollars and have a bigger impact. And I want you to do that. $18 million doesn't sound like much, but for a non-profit, that's pretty amazing growth. And when you look at this next line, we were impacting over $1 trillion francs or dollars in supply chain transactions, making them more sustainable or more oriented towards these earth-serving actions. We were excluding deforestation, species lost, human rights abuses in more than $1 trillion francs worth of supply chain transactions. And that's basically an investment of, if you look at 18 million out of $1 trillion, we were 0.018%. And that right there is serious leverage and serious impact with a small amount of money. I just quickly mentioned the Harvard Business School, just so that, business schools are famous, but I recently spoke to someone who'd done a course at the Harvard Business School, and they talked about the Nestle commitment to no deforestation. And they didn't mention the TFT and the work that I'd done in the dark room between the Nestle team and the Greenpeace team. So they missed it completely. They just thought Greenpeace beat them up and Nestle gave in. Wasn't what happened. So be careful what you'll learn at business school, as I think, the full lesson of these things is usually much deeper. So that was interesting to see that happen. I'm now working on the Pond Foundation. I've set up a new non-profit here in Switzerland, our My Carbon Zero program. Do Google My Carbon Zero, and you'll see that this is a new foundation working to combat climate change. But the lessons, I want to quickly get to the lessons. What are some of the lessons? I say some of the lessons. I probably need to write a lot more of these things down, but these are the lessons that I really want to share with you from my more than 20 years of being a social entrepreneur. There's many things beyond TFT that I've founded, all sorts of things, and beyond the Pond Foundation and beyond My Carbon Zero and A Different Way. But these are the lessons that I've learned, and these are recurring lessons that seem true to me that I want to share with you as you embark on your own journey to have an impact in the world. So the key one is to say, look, don't start unless you're prepared for hell, right? It is hard. It is, and it's also joyous. I didn't have enough lines here. So it is hell and heaven. When you achieve something major that changes someone's life for the good, or you protect a forest, there is no better feeling. but it's a tough old journey to get to those places. And there's a lot of people in the world who don't want you to get there. And that means you've got to know your passion. And I was very, very lucky as that young 15-year-old boy when I listened to St. Barb Baker on the radio, and he inspired me to travel this journey to try and protect the world's forests. So you've got to have that. You've got to have that passion. And understand that you will be challenged. I think you all know that, but you will be challenged on your values every day. There's opportunities to take shortcuts every day. And if you do, you will be lost. You must stay true to who you are and your values every day and in every decision you make, right? And don't give your ideas away. Every time I hear all these young entrepreneurs, they're saying, oh, I'm talking to this foundation or I'm talking to this venture capitalist. And like these ideas, these passions, these dreams, they're part of you. So don't be in a rush to give them away just to get some money, to get started. Hold true to your idea and see if you can make it work without giving it to others. That's not to say don't use venture capital, no, but make sure that you keep hold of that idea, because if it becomes someone else's passion and you lose it, then it won't work. You've got to have that passion. And you must, I'll probably say this 400 times, you must stay absolutely true to who you are. We certainly do need our intellect. I'm not saying that we don't need our brains and our intellect. We need our training, the sort of training that you're getting at EPFL. We need life experience. We need others around us to help us and guide us. These are all important things. But feel first. I come back to that point I made earlier. This is a key lesson for me. Feel it in your gut. Then think about how to implement that and then act. And a lot of people don't act. They spend a lot of time thinking, but you've got to feel the resonance and the dissonance and go towards the resonance. And really trust the universe. There's so many times you'll be challenged, but trust that it's going to be okay. And trust that inner voice, that duck, that inner wisdom, and hold to it always. Never, ever let it go. And just a couple more. You're going to need a lot of luck, right? You need luck. And so many people convince themselves that their businesses have taken off because of their brilliance and their intellect and their great decision making. Well, yes, that's a big part of it too, but you need a lot of luck. So be open for it. And timing is everything, but don't sweat it. Remember, you don't control anything, right? When I started TFT, no one was looking at responsible sourcing, and now everyone is, right? But we've spent about 15 years working in the wilderness. It was 10 years before our business took off, because then Nestle understood that they needed to get onto responsible sourcing, and that changed everything. But 10 years of hard slog to stay in business. So timing is helpful, but don't worry. If your idea is too early, if you believe in it and you have passion, stick with it, keep going. And that's this one, patience and faith, etc. You've got to have patience and faith. Your time will come. And if you keep going and you keep sticking true to your values, you will get there. You must have determination, belief, and you have to have the support of others. You can't do this alone. And that means humility. Too much ego is death. It stops you from listening. And this really is the last one. Keep going. That's how you get there. Just keep going. So you actually have, I believe you have everything you need already inside you, your inner wisdom. You've just got to listen to that voice and that passion, right? That's the key message I want to give you. You have everything you need to be a fantastic entrepreneur, bringing great impact and change to the world. You've just got to connect with yourself. And so the critical question that so many people don't pause to look at is, who are you? Who are you? What do you believe? What are your values? Write them down and spend the rest of your life trying to stick to them. And that is the key lesson that I've learned about how to scale the business as we did with TFT and continue to have amazing impact. And the last slide is just a cartoon from Lunik. Now, I love this cartoon. I used to give it to everyone who came to work for TFT. Just let it go for it, follow your dream, and it can be a path on which to travel. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That was really great. I want to move on to questions, comments. Please feel free to unmute, to chat. This is an interactive portion. So before I ask my questions, I will yield it to the participants. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask Scott a question directly on anything you presented or a challenge that you're facing at the moment.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for a lovely presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I was wondering if you could maybe share with us a little bit more on how you were helping people connect with themselves, as you were giving example of, connecting through values and that you were connected with yourself. Could you tell a little bit more about it?
Yeah, great question. And challenging, I would say it was. I think I'm much better at it now because I've learned quite a lot. And one of the things I do now is I take people out into nature, because I think once we're in nature, we connect to it and it helps us slow down. But a lot of the work that almost all of the work I would say that I did in those big 7 were in the boardrooms of these large companies. I remember in Jakarta, this meeting room in the 8th floor of the largest pulp and paper company in the world. And there was some strange meetings. We were a long way from nature in that meeting. And so I think the thing is to try and bring that spirit of connection into the room. So the key thing is when they are going off and screaming and carrying on, if you can be connected to who you are, and for me, you have to understand what that is. And I've done a lot of work all my life saying, and remember I talked about my experience as a child. I think that I'd been very connected to nature as a child. So when I was in those rooms and people were yelling and screaming, because Greenpeace wasn't in the room, so they would yell and scream at me as the proxy. Now, if I wasn't a sort of calm person, well connected to who I am, I may have started crying and I probably would have left the room and I wouldn't have gone back in. But I was like, these people are in pain and suffering. So having compassion for them and understanding that they were good people. They were running a business that was having terrible impact on the planet, but it didn't mean they were evil because they didn't get out of bed to do that. That was the consequence of their actions. And and they just needed someone to give them a bit of love, to be honest with you. So I spent a lot of time listening. And as I listened, gave them a bit of compassion. I didn't come saying, well, you need to do these 10 things, because who am I to know how to run a pulp and paper company or a palm oil company? But I could give them a few suggestions. What do you think of this? And gradually we grew. And then I'd say, maybe we need to talk to Greenpeace or some of these other NGOs. Well, what do you think? Oh, I don't know. It'll be all right. I'll be there with you. So we built trust, we built connection, we built relationships. And I think we have to give that time as well. That's probably another lesson. Give it time. Don't rush. Let these things come. And that relationship you build with people becomes a springboard for the change and impact that you want to have.
Thank you very much.
If I may, thank you, of course, for presentations. Still, although the spirit that you present is very, I want to believe in it, but to be very honest, I still have a hard time to trust everybody. And I wondered, because you mentioned these things of not diabolizing people, not think they're always evil and stuff. And you also mentioned all the experience you had with the layers of corruption everywhere. And so looking backwards to your experience, you keep with this spirit that with all the corruption that you faced, that you believe in the end it was just people trying to make a business and not really realizing what they were. I don't know. I still have to be honest. I'm really questioning also my own beliefs with your talk, and I have a internal fight.
Yeah, and look, it really is a great point. And I had spent some time in some dark rooms with people who I would almost say that having got out of the room, I would go to my hotel room and almost feel I needed to have a shower, because I somehow felt dirty by some of the discussion that had happened, right? Some of the suggestions that came out, and it came out when people were angry, and you're sitting in there and you're thinking, golly, these people are coming from a different universe. But I do believe over time, and all I can say is in the end, despite all of that, these companies made commitments that they then implemented millions and millions and millions of dollars to try and implement. So I could see they were serious. These were completely transformative decisions. So in some ways, I learned to forgive along the path as well. And like, I don't know, there's a lot of strange people in the world, but I don't know how they became that way. And who am I to think that I'm better than they are? So this concept of humility and not judging people becomes very important to me. I've heard so many people talk about President Trump and his supporters in the US. Well, there's a person who has very different values that I do. But I've met a lot of people who voted for President Trump, and I find them to be very, very fine human beings. These things happen. So somehow and corruption happens, and all sorts of bad things happen. But I feel there's a kernel of good in everybody. And if you can get through all of the mud and find it, you can inspire them to act from that place. And when APP, this huge company in Indonesia, committed to turning off the clearing operations in 2 million hectares of forest, no one could believe it. It was just extraordinary, because they'd spent 20 years saying, go to hell to everyone. And yet they did. And it wasn't just down to me. It was down to, the Greenpeace campaign, other people. But they traveled the journey. They were the ones who signed off on this policy, not me. So somewhere we were able to reach in and find that good thing. And part of the motivation was like, do you want to live your life being attacked by NGOs for the rest of your life? Or do you want to, and how do you think that's going to go for the sustainability of your business? So we do motivate them around the future of their business, right? So it wasn't just do something good for the planet. That wasn't going to get us anywhere. It was do something good and it'll be good for your business, and help them see that picture. And that I think was part of the mix as well. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
I just want to add, I spend a lot of time despairing as well, right? But I don't know. I realize that if we write off people, then there effectively is no hope. We may as well give up, right? We've got to believe that we can touch something in everybody. Otherwise, we may as well stop right now.
I think that's an excellent point to add. We have to try. Because otherwise, yeah, the future is abysmal. So we have a raised hand for Jonathan. Feel free to unmute and just go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I do have a question about how you bring people together when there are sturdy dichotomies at work, when you have some values that are core opposites, black and white. I'm talking environmental impact, for example, as opposed to pure financial reward. How do you bring these people together? Because they might not want to get the world to end. I don't think that anyone wants that, obviously. But still, in practice, they will have completely different approaches to what must be done. And they might not get angry. They might just see the other one as a fool. And so it's nice to talk about values, but at some point, some values are definitely antagonistic for one another. So how do you go beyond that? What are your proposals to help people communicate and to see from each other's perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan. And this is what we faced, and we continue to face. But this is certainly what we faced with all of the projects that I engaged with, where the companies were interested in making money, and that was coming at an environmental and social human rights cost, and the NGOs were interested in stopping that environmental and social cost. Right, so they were diametrically opposed. What was the approach? Well, the approach was to get in there and listen and talk. And what I found was, I always found there was common ground. I always found, and people could say, well, of course, in Nestle you probably would, because they're Europeans, and it becomes, sometimes it gets a little bit racist, to be honest with you. It's like, oh, well, the Asians, they just want to make lots, the Chinese, they just want to cut everything down and make lots of money. Well, I've worked with a lot of Chinese business people. And I don't know if I can speak about all of them. But as I said, not many of them get out of bed and think about how many people can we put in slavery today. It's not an intention. It happens. And I think if you highlight it for them and you help them see that there's another way. And the other key thing in this that I was able to do was business people are inherently motivated by the short term, right? By quarterly results. And even, that's even if you're a small company, you want to, your cash flow, if you're a startup company in the tech sector, you want to make sure you've got enough money to pay your salary at the end of the month. You're not talking quarterly, you're talking tomorrow, right? So the view is here. And if you can help people have a longer view and say, do you want to be linked to these? Do you want NGOs to be hanging off your building for the rest of your life? Do you want your customers, even if you're a small tech company, do you want your customers looking at you saying, what are these people doing on sustainability? So I believe it's come more and more important now. Everyone wants to know after COVID what people are doing on ESG, right? So if you're a small tech startup and you're nowhere on ESG, that's not going to last very long. So helping people have a longer term view. And I always used to say, you've got to start like you mean to finish. Right? If you don't start destroying the planet today, and when someone calls you out on it in a year's time, when your company's up and running, you think you can turn it around, because you can't. You've got to start today like you mean to finish. So helping people have a longer term view and saying, your customers don't want you to be linked to deforestation, human rights abuses, pollution, climate change, whatever. They don't want you to be linked to those things. So get that stuff sorted out. And the NGOs don't want you to be linked to that either. So your customers, your money making ability is tied to doing the sort of things that the NGOs are asking you to do. So that always was the common ground. They may come at it from a different perspective. The NGOs are worried about biodiversity and climate change. The company might be worried about their profits, but to have their profits, they need to make sure that they're not damaging biodiversity and climate change, for example, or human rights, right? So there's common ground there. The reason they're acting might be different, but if you find the common ground, you can have the same result. That's been my experience.
Okay, but from that perspective, we are trying to pressure them, right? So there is social pressure for them to change, and nowadays that perfectly works, because there have been years and years of people talking about climate change and how it's a necessity to actually act upon it. But how did you do it back 22 years ago, for example? Because the social pressure surely was not there. You might make them understand that, oh yeah, there might be some reward in the very long term, but how do you make it worthy for people that are looking for the long shot, that are looking 20 years, 30 years from now, they go like, okay, maybe then I will have a bit more edge than the other companies that are not already indulging in that process. But for the time being, I'm risking the edge because I'm undergoing some drastic changes that will compromise my economical viability, for example.
I can only speak from my experience, Jonathan, which was to sit with these company leaders and help them navigate their journey, because it was one thing to make a policy based on strong values. And I don't always, I agree, I'm not sure they always held those values very, very closely and strongly, but they put out a policy statement, and then it was like, well, okay, we need to help you implement that now. And so while I was in the dark room helping them come up with these commitments, in discussion and dialogue with the NGOs, my colleagues in the TFT were out in the field visiting their plantations, visiting farms and factories and mills, and making sure that they were actually implementing those policies. So it was a double-edged attack in a way. Help them make commitments and then get out into the field and help them implement them. And if they weren't implementing them, you can be sure the NGOs would come back with some pretty big boots and give them a good kicking. And that did happen. So this is what I'm doing now with the Pond Foundation and My Carbon Zero, is to try and take this experience of helping people travel these change journeys to a greater scale. Instead of worrying about supply chains, Earthworm Foundation is doing that now. That's what TFT is now called. I want to get people I want to see if I can take the lessons I've learned about bringing change to that really, really big question of climate change. So just getting started on that, and hopefully we'll make it.
Excellent. Thank you. Alexander has one last question. Do you have a minute for that, Scott?
Yes, I do, yes.
All right.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that I find your ideas and concepts much easier to implement if you're coming as an external mediator. Mm-hmm. But do you have some tips on how to find this perspective, or how to handle this situation if you are one of the team members that is highly invested in a situation personally, financially? For you the stakes are very high. what kind of like self-work you can do to help yourself, reach your ideas?
Well, it's that conclusion that I said many times during the presentation, is you've got to be connected to yourself. And people are motivated by money and making, getting a nice house, a nice car, having a good level of life, of quality of life. But there's other things in there as well. And, you might want that, but you might not want to be linked to these negative things and these bad things. And your kids might not want you to be doing that either. So really, no matter where you are, whether you're in a company or an external advisor, you got to get connected to your values. And most of us, not all, but pretty much most of us, have some good inside. And I believe in that. And if I didn't believe in that, I don't think I'd have made the achievements that I did, because I would never have gone into the dark rooms and sat with people who were effectively responsible for killing people and doing a lot of bad stuff. So I absolutely believe in the essential truth that, from my own essential truth, it's not necessarily anyone else's essential truth, but my essential truth is that I can help people, if I can help people connect to who they are as human beings, then mostly that's pretty good. And they will act. We can inspire them to act in a way that's good for the planet.
Yeah. And thank you, Scott. And I would like to add, just for those of you, to your question, I send and innovators here in the room, is that when you do your pitch, whatever your technology is, impact or not, your most successful pitch of your business is if you can really speak to the human need, right? Like of the audience, of who you want to reach. The most successful sales pitches are those that target the humanity and the viewer and the audience. And that makes the connection, that you get the audience right away. If you present a problem, impact related or not, that has true human consequences for the well-being of us, of each individual. And I think that's a way to think about, connecting to ourselves also helps with the strategy of like, how do you frame a sales pitch? How do you frame, even if you have you're pitching on stage, those are ways in which, as a founder, as an innovator, you have to keep an eye on. But it's all about your customer, understanding customers are human. So it's understanding that human connection of what can you offer, like Scott said, a different way. And that's how you reach, whether you're trying to convert a customer to your solution, or where you're trying to convert a partner to do something different. You're offering a solution to someone that is speaking to their concerns as a human being, to their heart and to their feelings. And I think that's the biggest lesson here to learn, I would say, right, Scott?
Yeah, you've got to inspire people, not tell them what they're doing wrong. That doesn't help people very much. I'm going to have to dive out, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Scott. No worries.
I hope that was helpful, and good luck with everything else, and good luck with everything that everyone's doing.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, thanks everybody.
And for those of you in the chat, I put a link to the survey, so please fill it out. We'll send you some snacks and a voucher. So thanks for spending the afternoon with us.
Bye-bye.
Take care.